But I know about the joy that persists, she says, even though it might seem like a temporary insanity. She says, I looked at my friend, red eyes and almost tear-stained shirt, and I could see how impossible joy felt to her. In fact, not long ago, I would not have believed in joy either. It's strange to say it like that, but I believe in joy. We can't mistake it for anything less than what it is. One of the most powerful ways we experience the deepest and most healing forms of gratitude, delight, and hope.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. My name is Phil Schiavone with the Coalition for Christian Outreach, the CCO, where we are a campus ministry transforming college students to transform the world. And with me today from Hearts and Minds Books in Dallastown, Pennsylvania, the host with the most to say about the books that you should be reading, Byron Borger. How are you doing today, Byron?
I ought to be like a professional wrestler or something, with that intro that you do every time, Phil. This is just awesome. I'm doing pretty good. Great to be here. If you're listening in from the CCO, we thank you a lot. We know it's getting to be the time when students are graduating and you're starting to wind down all your stuff and sharing the gospel with students and saying goodbyes and making plans for the summer. So it's a hard season. I've been there. I know what it's like. It's full of energy, but also a lot of late nights. So if you're listening in, we thank you. And if you're not with the CCO, that's a great campus ministry that Phil works for. And they have people scattered all over the place, partnering with churches to reach college students with a pretty holistic vision of the gospel. So we do this book notes for everybody. There's 3 books from Hearts and Minds for anybody listening in, but a special shout out to the CCO friends that might be listening in or watching.
Yeah, thanks. It's 21 years now for me in the CCO. I know you've been connected for maybe, I won't say how many more years longer than that, but I serve as an area director and I supervise staff, and even 12 years into the supervisory role. And there's no better job than being boots on the ground campus minister and working with these college students, especially as they are transitioning into summertime or maybe even their vocations or, figuring out what their vocations are. Yep. And time of transition is always interesting, whether that's, as a college student or whether in midlife or later in life or even in Bible times, right? Like the Exodus and all that. And I think we've got 3 outstanding titles that gets us through transitionary times of life. So Byron, why don't you just kick us right off?
Yeah, these books I'm going to list, it's an exciting time for CCO. And, I even did that little book called Serious Dreams, which was about, they were commencement speeches given at Christian colleges to encourage students to go out and live into the vocations, to find new jobs, to find new churches, to make a difference in the world as they commence a new adult life. But, in the middle of all the enthusiasm of graduations and serious dreams, and our friend, Erica did that book After College. There's so much enthusiasm and generative ideas about making a new career change in times of transition. Yet, for so many people, transitions are hard. Some transitions are not actually wanted. We go through times of grief and hardship. You and I both, Phil, have coped with some chronic pain in our lives. You more than me, but we've gone through some hard seasons. And so the 3 books I'm going to mention now are less about the enthusiastic joy of new beginnings,
Sure.
But some of the hard stuff that happens during these times. In the first book, it released yesterday as we are recording, and it's one of the books of the year. It is the long-awaited book by Tish Harrison Warren. Tish is a good friend of the CCO, was an Anglican priest in Pittsburgh for a while, has been to Jubilee more than once, and it is called What Grows in Weary Lands. What Grows in Weary Lands. It is about Christian resilience, about how to be people of resilience when, in fact, you are weary, when you're burned out, when you don't sense God's presence like you used to, when things are hard for you, maybe not out of tragedy, although she's experienced some tragedy in her life, but less tragedy and more just about the doldrums, about the hard times, about the maybe just dull times. And so are there those times, those seasons when you just don't sense God quite like you used to, and yet in the weariness of it all, God can show up? or things in our past can come to the fore, and we can use those to build on ways to get through the hard times. This is a spectacular book. It is so well written. She's a classy writer. Some of us know her from her wonderful, wonderful book, one of my all-time favorites, called Liturgy of the Ordinary. It has a peanut butter sandwich on the front, and she connects practices that we learn at church or in our Christian lives, keeping Sabbath, receiving Eucharist, passing the peace to others, even just showing up at church on a weekly basis, how those kind of practices can help us practice the presence of God in an ordinary day. And she walks you through one day of her life, from doing emails to arguing with her husband to apologizing to her kids. It weaves together the practice of the presence of God and discerning how to do that by incorporating practices that we've actually practiced at church. So I love that book, Finding God in the Ordinary and linking sort of Sunday and Monday worship and daily life, Liturgy of the Ordinary. And then she followed that up with one of my, again, all-time favorite books. It's called A Prayer in the Night. Prayer in the Night. It's an incredible book about praying the Compline Prayer, which is an evening prayer in the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. And the Anglican tradition, or the Catholic tradition, of praying the hours, we get to that evening prayer. But for her, of course, praying at night is not just the absolute practice of praying at bedtime, but it's actually this question of how do you pray when you're weary, when you're alone, when you're in the dark, when you don't feel God's presence. So it's a book about prayer at night, in the metaphor, the dark night of the soul, even. So that's an incredible book on prayer and worship for those that weep and those that wait and those that watch and those that work. So I could talk about that all day. She was going to write another book, and it did not come easy. She had gotten a gig being a New York Times columnist, which was pretty remarkable for a young writer, particularly an evangelical writer, to actually be asked to do op-ed pieces in the New York Times. And those came pretty easily to her, and then they didn't. It was writer's block. It was emotional block. It was hardship. Because she's a friend, I know a bit about that. Not much, but a little bit, and she's written on Facebook and shared with other friends that this new book that she was working on just wasn't coming. And so she was experiencing some hardship in her life, the stuff she wrote about in maybe the other books. And finally, this came out, and it is about finding God's resilience in the midst of weary and dry times. What I'd like to do is to just give you a sense of this, is read a little bit of it. So gather around, kids. This is sort of story time here. I'll just tell you kind of the lay of the land first in the beginning. The chapters are discovering the desert, what it's like to discover God in a weary land. And she means the metaphorical desert. And you think of the desert fathers that went into this very dangerous territory to find God in the 3rd century. She has a section called Stay in Your Cell, which is advice from one of the medieval mystics to have stability, as they call it, to stay put, to just keep at it, and to what it means to stay in your prayer closet, in your cell. The next one is Pledge Your Body to These Walls, which is a Benedictine notion of stability in place, where you're committing yourself to community, to others, to a place and a gathering of people. You don't vacate the people that love you most when you're not feeling it. The next one is called Wait in the Womb, and that's about hope and how that can transform a sense of perseverance and can actually foster resilience when you focus on hope, even if you don't feel it. The next is a curious chapter. It's called Relax the Bow. You have to read to see what that's all about. But it's about grace transforming our own effort. We have to put some effort into it, but yet we wait on God. It's that mystery of what we do and what God does, and how if we relax our efforts, we can experience the grace that God actually provides in these hard times. The next chapter is called Let the Silt Settle. Silence in creating ways to connect with the source of all things through silence. Brace the Wall is the next chapter. That's persevering amidst doubt and disorientation even. And then the last chapter is called All Smoke, All Flame, which is the culmination of Christian resilience. She talks a bit about flame in the beginning of the book, which is really kind of a fun chapter. She said or a fun page or two, where she says that her early days as a youth and her campus ministry used the metaphor of fire all the time, being on fire, being a light for God, firing things up. Just kind of funny, because many of us have been through there. And then she says, what happens when there is no fire? She said they could have called the park service on us. There was so much flame language going on. but yet then the flame dies. And what do you do? And so this is a section of the book that I'll just read a little bit of to help you kind of understand some of the songs she sang about the lighting a fire and the stuff. I never thought about what specifically it looked like to be on fire for Jesus, but it seemed to be the goal of Christian discipleship. I suppose I wanted a certain emotional experience. I wanted to feel full of faith, of zeal, of certainty, of strength. I wanted to have a direct experience of God's constant presence. And this desire, she says, is not bad. But what about the times when the fire does not start? She writes about going to this retreat center, and she calls her first editor. She's with a different publisher now, but her first editor, she calls, and she said, I still talk with her when things feel too heavy or too hard. I told her I felt burned out. I told her I didn't know how to keep going in my life, in my work, or my faith. I told her God felt distant, and any muse in my writing had likewise was nowhere to be found. Marcia is wise and patient with me. She said that spiritual growth and art making alike are usually not found in a sudden insight, like a burst of flame, but in the steady laying on of the logs, in the long, at times monotonous tending of a fire that sputters, dwindles, burns out, and then at times unexpectedly flickers back to life. She says, as I sat in the retreat center then, burning through matchsticks, I thought about Marcia's words. She was trying to start a fire. I'd take a break from my efforts and sit staring at the dark fireplace, praying about my life, my sense of lostness and dissolution. I'd journal and read a psalm and then go back to the kindling again. Still, nothing was happening. Time seemed to stretch endlessly into a frigid night. I just kept going, adding to my log pile, striking matches, rearranging tinder. Then suddenly, one more try, one more match, and the flame caught and blazed to life. Within minutes, the fire I'd hoped for was warming my hands, the heat flushing my cheeks, the flames brilliant and cheerful. And the metaphor wasn't lost on me. All the kindling, all those logs and twigs and shreds of newspaper that had piled up over the empty hours fed the eventual flame. All the time, it had felt like nothing was happening. But every bit of kindling I piled up in frustration fed that fire before me. The fire burned for hours. I sat by it late into the night, gazing at it quietly. Those flickering flames whispered hope. They told me that this time in my life, a season that seemed as if nothing was right or alight, was, if I could trust it, a time of tending that, in the hands of God, had meaning and purpose. I cannot force fire. I cannot make it spark to life on my timeline, through my skill, or by sheer willpower. It's a mystery how it comes at all. She says then, but I can wait. I can keep going. The practices of our faith, acts of perseverance and trust that may feel futile, are at last the fragile kindling set ablaze by the Spirit at just the right time. In the end, it all feeds the flame. In the end, nothing will be wasted. Isn't that beautiful stuff, Phil? Isn't that great?
It's the best. It's the stuff that like encourages me as a parent when it feels like the routine is just the same every day and I've got all these other wants and desires, but it's bath time. It's bedtime, right? Like but it's also the stuff of chronic illness, chronic pain. It speaks to that, but it's also speaking to the lessons I'm trying to get my kids to understand, and particularly like my 11-year-old of these habits and these moments of not being able to do everything you want, but doing the right thing each day. And so, it's just, man, it's one of those things where like I think we all deep down inside aspire to like wanting to live that way until you're faced with it. And I hear her wrestling with that of like, of course I'm gonna keep at it, but what if the flame never comes? And so so beautifully written and experiential as well as wise in her words.
She tells a lot of stories like this. And again, she spent time in campus ministry. And so it is not lost on me that many of our 20-somethings, older teens, young 20s, in their college years, are maybe going through some of this themselves. We encourage a vibrant faith, And even at places like Jubilee, we see the pictures that they tend to take of kids raising their arms in ecstasy almost. There's a lot of excitement and warmth and enthusiasm in groups, particularly big groups and contemporary praise music. But then they go back to the dorm and man, they just might not feel it. Or they go back home to an ordinary, boring church in the summertime that doesn't have a lot of young people with them. And now all of a sudden they're feeling like, was this just manipulated? Was this just emotional feeling, or is there a sense in which I can keep at this even when I don't feel it the way I once did, a year ago? So yeah, I think even for our college students, and certainly for us in midlife, or you in midlife, and listen to this. This is another piece of the book. She goes, a few years ago, a popular writer posted something online about how true artists, true writers, those really committed to the craft, must flee from the interruptions and pressures of life and abscond to the woods to write in deepest, unbroken concentration for a week or more. My friends, she says, who were both artists and mothers, passed around his words, guffawing. If we waited for the wooden cabin, we would never create a thing, they laughed. They swapped stories about watching their children's fingers slip pleadingly under their studio doors or balancing their laptops on their legs during a kid's track meet. They knew that for them, the fantasy of the cabin in the woods was a trap. It would keep them from the work they needed to do today, amidst the various and complex vocations that they had in the life they actually lived. This is similarly true, she says, in the craft of faith. The truth is, my life is nothing like a monk's. Now, she had just gotten done doing a chapter about the monastic experiences and what you can learn from the medieval monks, She says, but my life is nothing like a monk's. I wake up each day not to chimes calling my community to prayer, but to the dog scratching at his crate or the voices of my children calling for breakfast or fighting over who gets the bathroom first. I do not live like the fathers in a vast desert, but in a bustling city with airplanes droning overhead and a Wi-Fi in every shop. The stories of saints and monks of old are a guide and a tutor, but for me, they can also breed a species of temptation that I have come to call the monastic fantasy. And she writes in the next pages about reading the Genesee Diary by Henry Nouwen, which is his memoir of going to the monastery in upstate New York, where some of our CCO staff go every year on a silent retreat. We read that book together, some of you do, and go there to this Genesee place to reenact what Henry Nouwen experienced. And she says, yeah, I love that. But there is this temptation to think that that's the place you have to practice your deepest faith, where you can feel closest to God in some special environment. But how does it work when you're doing Zoom meetings and you've got loud children and you've got struggles of putting meals on the table and so forth? And she says, when you read the Genesee Diary by Henry Nouwen, in the midst of his rather beautiful monastic experience there, his retreat, he talks about his own temptations and how we're not free of sins, even when we go to the special places. So anyway, I just like how she writes. I like how beautiful she writes. I like how practical she is. I like how she blends together ancient good theories. She's ecumenical and draws on the Russian mystics and the Desert Fathers and the medieval reformers. But yet, she always then brings it down to the liturgy of the ordinary, to the real ordinary stuff she actually goes through in her real lived experience. It's not pie in the sky or romanticism. It's deep, hard-won resilience that comes by putting yourself into the right places and doing the right stuff as you let the silt settle, as she says. So anyway, I like this. It's hardback. It just came out yesterday. We've already sent out dozens and dozens of pre-orders that we had accumulated for this. We got it at 20% off. And if anybody's listening in, you should grab this book. The advanced praise on it is fantastic. The blurbs in the back are from John Mark Comer and Annie Downs, Justin Early, who a lot of people like, Esau McCulley, African-American Anglican, wrote the foreword to the book, and he's a good friend of hers. Andy Crouch has a rave review, and he loves both her clarity about desolation, and consolation, as Ignatius would put it. And Andy says that she's honest about both desolation and consolation, her honesty and her hope. So there you go. That's the first one I wanted to tell you about today.
Wonderful. We'll lead us right into the next one, Byron.
Well, the next one is written very differently, and it's got this same theme of hope and joy amidst very hard times. And it's by a woman who's a very different writer than Tish, although the two of them, I just adore their writing styles. Tish is eloquent and elegant and kind of funny at times, but yet sort of serious. This writer is a professor at Duke, so she's super brainy, and she's hilarious. Her name is Kate Bowler, and the book is called Joyful Anyway. Now, to understand this book, Joyful Anyway, it's got balloons on the cover. You have to know a little bit about her backstory. And so I'll tell you real quickly about two other books that she wrote that are amongst my all-time favorites. They are tremendous memoirs. The first one is called Everything Happens for a Reason. I'll hold it up here if you're watching this. Everything Happens for a Reason. It's in paperback now. And the subtitle is And Other Lies I've Loved. Everything happens for a reason. She said that's not true. It's not biblical, it's not faithful, and it's not helpful. And then after that, she wrote another one called No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear. Both of these books are the memoirs of being a young, promising theologian. She'd done an academic book on the name it and claim it prosperity heresy, that people says that God will heal you no matter what and give you money and riches, and on some of these mega church pastors that are living with multiple houses and airplanes and all that stuff, Joyce Myers and these kind of guys that tell you God will give you whatever you want. And look at me, I'm wealthy and I can prove it, Joel Osteen and these guys. So she wrote an academic book on power of prayer, but not in that blessed prosperity way. And she got a terminal illness, a brain tumor. She was not going to live long. And this is the memoir of being a theologian and a young academic, a professor at Duke, and being put in the hospital with an incredibly dreadful and scary disease. She's got little kids. It's poignant. It's a memoir of grief and hardship, but yet her fighting the cancer. And wouldn't you know it, at the end of the book, she hasn't died yet. She literally thinks she's going to die within the year. And she has a grueling treatment. It's a grueling memoir of some pain she's gone through. But yet she has people like Stanley Hauerwas and Will Willimon, other friends at Duke, Ellen Davis, great biblical scholars and people of faith that end up coming to her hospital room to pray for her or start meal trains to help with her kids. And so it's a really great, resilient story of finding the real truth of what God's sovereignty means, and not some cheesy little thing. Well, everything happens for a reason, so just be happy. The next one she wrote while she's going through treatment, and she had not died. And as I'm noting a new book she's done, you can tell she has not died. She's done some devotionals. She's in remission. It's hard stuff for her. She is not fully cancer-free, but it is in pretty much remission. And she has written these incredible books that I want to tell you are laugh out loud funny. She's such a good writer. I say she's this generation's Anne Lamott, for people that like Anne Lamott, a clever writer that can turn a phrase just so that it's profound and makes you howl out loud with laughter. She's a really good writer, a really funny writer. And I say all this to tell you why I can like this book, Joyful Anyway. Like that book that says everything happens for a reason and other lies we've learned. The be joyful in all things strikes me as not faithful to the Bible, which calls us to lament, to weep with those who weep. Jesus himself wept. We know that, the shortest verse in the Bible. There's plenty in the Bible about not always being happy. And so I resist anybody that gives you this crap about, oh, you should just rejoice all the time and be happy and don't complain. And, the Bible says we should protest and lament. It calls us to that kind of realism and truthfulness, even as we look for joy in the midst of the pain. That's why I like Kate Bowler's writing. It's why I like Tish Warren. So she has earned the right in my book to say joyful anyway. And she writes about how joy can be that thing that sustains us through difficult times. She's a heck of a great writer. She's a fun writer. She's a funny writer, even though she's writing about deadly serious stuff. Let me just read a little bit of her book for you. This will give you a flavor, and this isn't her funniest lines, but it's clever and upbeat. Listen to this. She says, when a loss of any kind, a breakup or a breakdown or any terrible undoing descends upon your life, joy seems to vanish. The vibrancy that once filled your days fades, leaving the world colorless and cold. This sudden shift doesn't simply numb, it transforms everything around you. Laughter feels strange, and a sense of ease is a distant memory. In this new reality, even the smallest spark of joy seems impossible to ignite. And even worse, suggested the 19th century philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, joy becomes the source of suffering. Its memory, that you don't have joy anymore, becomes our ruin and our hurt. It is not so much lost as missed, he wrote. When you are in the deep abyss of grief, sadness, or worst of all, despair, joy feels like an insult. Well, she's talking about a friend who's going through cancer as well, and she says, "I'm barely okay," my friend said tearfully, "and now you're trying to convince me that I should feel euphoric? Are you insane?" And she writes, "At that, we both cracked a smile, which turned into a long stretch of jokes about me. Wasn't I the person who recently insisted that we take a 3-hour detour on a drive to visit the world's largest turtle made of spare tires? Hadn't I organized a walking contest that actually dislocated a friend's hip because everyone was forced to dress like Dolly Parton? Was I really to be trusted? But I know about the joy that persists," she says, "even though it might seem like a temporary insanity." She says, "I looked at my friend, red eyes and almost tear-stained shirt, and I could see how impossible joy felt to her. In fact, not long ago, I would not have believed in joy either. It's strange to say it like that, but I believe in joy. We can't mistake it for anything less than what it is, one of the most powerful ways we experience the deepest and most healing forms of gratitude, delight, and hope. It is a kind of transcendence. Joy is a glimmer of love and forgiveness and wholeness that lifts us out of reality for a moment and gives us back to ourselves anew." Isn't that nicely written? It gives us ourselves back, fresh and anew, even in the midst of terrible, terrible hard times. She survived cancer and she survived life, and she's been through hell and back. And so she has the right to tell us to be joyful. Some people don't get to say that to us because they just are hurtful when they say it. But I trust her immensely, and she's a fun writer. And this is a great, interesting, curious book about the role of joy in our lives. It's rich and wise and thoughtful and fun. And it does have an endorsement by Anne Lamott on it. So there you go. The Anne Lamott of our generation, Kate Bowler from Duke Theological Seminary.
It's delightful. I was reflecting on both me and my kids because of my chronic throat disease. I can't swallow pills very easily, so I often have to like crush it up in applesauce or something. And or with the kids, you doll up the medicine in something nice so they take it. And her writing style kind of reminds me of that, and kind of her message too, right? Of like, this can be a hard pill to swallow, but if it's done with joy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even talking about joy can be a tough pill to swallow. If you're in the midst of great pain, like the friend who was weeping, and she said, "You want me to believe in joy? Are you out of your mind? Like, what are you thinking?"
Yes.
So I don't want to be joyful when I'm hurting. But she has the right to stretch us into that because she knows what the heck she's talking about. So I trust her. I don't always agree, and I don't always like what she has to say, but it's a great read. It's a thrilling book. It's curious. And so I respect Kate a lot, and I would highly recommend her memoirs and now this new one that's just full of stories called Joy Anyway. Well, let me close up real quick with one more. This is by a woman named Courtney Ellis. Courtney wrote a book on happiness, in fact, years ago, and I resisted it again because I didn't like the title. I just thought, I don't like cheap stuff about happiness. And it's not cheap at all. I realize it's a very good book. She's on Twitter. She's on Instagram, all that sort of stuff. She works for a Presbyterian church, PCUSA Church, out in California, an evangelically minded, wonderful church. And she wrote a book a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago now, that I adored. I named it one of my books of the year. It's called Looking Up, her previous book, A Birder's Guide to Hope Through Grief. And it's a memoir of her coping with grief by way of taking up the hobby of being a birder, bird watching. And so there's a lot of nature writing. There's a lot of bird language. As you may know, Phil, I don't know if you know this, but there's just a whole lot of literature, wonderful writing about bird watching. There's another Christian book that just came out a week or so ago from Broadleaf Press about the spirituality of bird watching. Just like fly fishing. We just got a new book in the store on fly fishing and faith. So, and look, there you go. There's the great classic. There you go. The Bird Who's
I
Got.
got one on my desk by Amy Tan. Yep.
Yeah. Man, the A.B. Tan one there, wonderful novelist, Asian American writer. And she writes a glorious memoir sort of about the deep emotions of bird watching. Well, anyway, Looking Up is a book about grief, and it would fit very well in today's podcast. But what I want to say about this one is not her previous one, Looking Up, is her brand new one. And it's called Weathering Change. Weathering Change, Seeking Peace Amid Life's Tough Transitions. And it is very much about the stuff we've talked about, resilience and hope and even joy in the middle of times of transition, when you're grieving or feeling lost or confused because you're moving on to a new stage of life. Weathering change. The book is kind of about adaptive change, what it means to be a person that's willing to change, to adapt to your environment, to always be growing, to always be transitioning, to take on new contexts. So it is about change. But here's the trick. She, Courtney Ellis, says the way to do this, or one way to do this, the way that works for her, is by being a nature lover. Not just a bird watcher as her previous book, but generally to be attentive to hiking and nature and the beauty of bugs and attentiveness to the soil, to land, to space, to clouds, to just being attentive to the great outdoors is a practice that we can take that will help us be adaptive in our willingness to change. So we can weather change well when we pay attention to the weather. Sort of a play on words there. The writing is spectacular. The ideas are vivid. The nature writing is glorious. There's a writer I like a lot. She lives in Harrisburg called Lori Ferguson Wilbert. She wrote a couple of memoirs about nature writing and stuff, books that I've really appreciated immensely. And she wrote the foreword, and she wrote it as almost a letter to the readers. She writes, "Dear reader," and she says, when I feel lost or adrift or I'm about to change and I don't know what to do, I look at nature. Even before I pray to God, I just open my eyes and see what God is doing in the outdoors. And so if you're in a new season of life, it can teach you something. And she says here in this beautiful book, Courtney Ellis brings us along with her on a journey through weather, the seasons, the land, and the inhabitants of this earth that we call home. She weaves together her own stories and the stories of birds and plants, of water and wind and soil, to show us where to look when everything sure begins to feel uncertain. Courtney does not shrink from death in the natural world, nor gloss over it. She brings a magnifying glass to it, showing us how slow, painful, and achingly beautiful change is. Books like these, she says, are catnip for me. The juxtaposition of story and science, the natural world and spiritual growth. I will never tire of works like these. And Courtney has written a book that encapsulates all of this beautifully. And I cannot commend this work more to you. So whether you like to hike or not, whether you ride your bike or not, it doesn't really matter. The writing will help you do that vicariously. You could take it along with you on a hike. You could take it along with you on a journey if you're going out in a canoe or just going for a walk in the woods. But I'll tell you what, her nature writing is beautiful, but what she sees in God's creation that she illuminates through the power of her artful words is that nature is always changing. And the creativity of attending to that well allows us to weather change, as she puts it. Weathering change, seeking peace among life's tough transitions, by Courtney Ellis, published by InterVarsity Press. The endorsements are just wonderful, by wonderful people. You know, Fernando Ortega, the glorious singer, the artist, writer, singer-songwriter, he's a bird photographer, by the way, and he loves the book. Deborah Reinstra, who teaches at Calvin, says, spend a little time with this congenial companion, reveling and reveling in delight and wonder and God's provision. And you will then feel more at ease with change and less alone. So if you're nervous about change, or you're feeling like you're alone, you feel like something's happening, but you don't know quite what it is, spend some time with her, and she'll point you to the outdoors that will finally point you to God. It's a great read. It's a great book, and I'm happy to tell people about it.
That's wonderful. As you were speaking on nature, the phrase Mother Nature popped in my head, and we're recording this just 2 days after Mother's Day. As we've mentioned, like chronic pain, chronic illness has been part of my life, but so have books in these seasons, and these books can be mothering to us. They can guide us through these difficult times. And I don't know if you tried this, but you picked out 3 lady authors as well. And so I don't know if they're all mothers or not, but I think it just rings true. We all know that life isn't easy. Like that's kind of like in our bones, especially as we mature. And we all want guides, right? We all need guides through that. I think you just gave us 3 books that can mother us a little bit better through these difficult times.
That's well put, Phil. That really is. It's interesting you connected that. Yeah, they are all women writers, and they are amongst my favorites. They really are great writers, and almost anything they write would be worth reading, would be a joy and an encouragement, a mothering sort of guidance, if you will, and an encouragement and nurturing. But these all look at hard times. Weathering change can be painful, going through illness and chronic illness, and how to find joy in the middle of that. And the resilience we need for when we're feeling dry or alone, like in Tish's wonderful new book. So these are all really new books. They're all really good. They're all women writers. And we got them all at 20% off. So whether you're young or old, whether you're a college student working with the CCO, whether you're a staff person, or whether you're like us in my latter years here in my 70s, man, all these books are well worth reading. And I'm excited to tell you about it. Yeah. Thanks, Phil, for letting me ramble on about this stuff. I so appreciate your love for books and glad for this podcast.
Well, thank you, Byron. Thanks for guiding us through these wonderful guides that will help us surely through our differing and difficult seasons. And as Byron mentioned, the books mentioned here are all 20% off, and the link to order them will be the first link you see in the show notes, no matter what medium you are watching or listening these to. So check out the show notes, not only for the link to order these books, but you can contact us and let us know what you think of these books, and let us know what you think of the podcast. And of course, like and share and leave a review. That helps get this podcast into the ears and onto the eyes of others as well, so we can get those books out there and have more people reading these books. So on behalf of Byron Borger and Hearts and Minds Books, as well as myself and the CCO, thank you once again for listening to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast.